Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Big Buzz Breakfast Club. My name is Brad Ball, and I'm the Vice President at Big Buzz Idea Group. A little housekeeping as we get our program up and running today. So the session is being recorded, and we will share that recording with you after the event over email. As we go through the program and the panel discussion today, please put any questions that you have into the Q&A box. So we do have a special time dedicated for audience questions at the end. Also, closed captioning is available for today's program. So you can manage that, turning it on and off using the Zoom menu, the button in the Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen. Big Buzz Idea Group powers nonprofit organizations to fuel positive change in the world. Founded in the fall of 2004, Big Buzz Idea Group works with nonprofits and associations who want their offices to run more efficiently so they can focus on their mission and vision. We believe that leadership can more effectively work on their organizational growth, knowing they can rely on an honest and caring team. For less than the cost of a single employee, our experienced team executes a unique combination of management, marketing, and event services to suit your needs. Well, on to today's program. Workforce is the word of the moment. So whether it's people leaving their jobs, the number of workers available, or the unique skill sets today's top employees need for success, hiring is definitely in the headlines. So we're excited to share with you today a conversation about how to hire and keep your organization's next great employee. So introducing today's panelists. Heather Eddy is President and CEO of KEES. Heather Eddy's primary passion is helping nonprofits achieve excellence through building strong, capable, and diverse leadership teams. In her 25-year career, Heather has partnered with nonprofit boards on over 200 executive searches for top leadership, primarily CEO, executive director, and president roles, and a variety of other senior leadership positions. She's often called when the board seeks to diversify and re-energize a leadership team through the next leader. She previously served for 17 years in multiple leadership roles with the Alford Group before co-founding KEES in 2013. As a frequent speaker, she increasingly contributes knowledge to the nonprofit sector in the areas of executive succession planning, engagement of boards and governing bodies, building leadership teams, and strategic philanthropy. She leads most of the firm's searches for CEO and executive director level roles and specializes in working with organizations in some state of board or staff transition. Our second panelist today, Eddy Dorsey, is the Workforce Development Manager at IC Stars. Eddy Dorsey has 15 years of experience working directly with people from underserved communities. She is dedicated to creating opportunities for others through consistent advocacy. Her previous work includes in nonprofit and higher education spaces, combined with her own background and life experiences, have given her a continued desire to serve communities with limited opportunities. As a first-generation college graduate herself, she understands that lack of access can sometimes hold people back from their true potential. She's committed to connecting talented individuals to great employers through her work at IC Stars. Eddy is a firm believer that anyone can achieve their goals regardless of where they come from, and she is certain that serving her community and helping to remove barriers for people is a large part of her calling in this world. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and then invite our panelists to join me. Eddy and Heather, come on.
Morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation, and great to be on a panel with Eddy.
Excellent. So we're going to approach today's conversation in two parts: how to find great employees and how to keep them once they've been hired. First, though, I'd like to take a minute for each of you to tell us a bit more about the companies that you work for, because our bios give great personal context, but I'd like to know a little bit more about the work that your companies do and who they serve. And then go ahead and give us a high-level overview of what you're seeing going on in hiring and then in the job market. Heather, why don't you go first on this one, please?
Great. Well, first of all, Brad and team at Big Buzz, I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to speak. It's definitely an evolving and challenging time in the hiring, retention, building teams market. And these sorts of conversations are changing every day, and so very important to helping leaders make good decisions. So you shared a little bit of my personal bio. KEES is a executive search and consulting firm that partners with nonprofits and public institutions to build strong leadership teams. So the majority of our work is retained executive search, although we do some gap staffing, some interim staffing. We help fill positions at top levels and mid levels of an organization. And we also do individual coaching and kind of random spot projects on leadership development, building teams, compensation review, different things that impact a nonprofit's ability to hire, retain, and have a strong team. So I'll share a little bit of just perspectives. I jotted down a couple things. And so the first thing about the current labor force that we are seeing, and at all levels, it doesn't matter if it's executive level or entry level, it's definitely, we're seeing different reactions and different actions by generation, where people are at in their life stage and life cycle. I would say we've seen a complete recalibration of priorities. And that was slowly happening anyway, as we moved through the generations and thoughts about work and where does work fit into life and life fit into work and where do they fit together. And I would say that that's completely recalibrated. Usually we were seeing probably people in the latter third of their career with a much different focus on work than people entering their career. Now we've seen a lot of that collapse together and kind of meet in the middle. And lastly, I would say, the adage of change is constant is definitely there. So we are seeing unpredictable behavior at all levels, from hiring managers to direct supervising managers to people in the workforce at any level. Quite frankly, with my years of experience in consulting with nonprofit executives, and more recently in the past 5 years, public sector executives, what I might say today and think today might be very different. So Brad, we should perhaps run this again tomorrow and see what we say. Every day is yielding new and different things.
That sounds good. Aurelie?
Hello, good morning, everyone. So IC Stars is a nonprofit organization, been in Chicago for 20 years, and we are business, leadership, and technology. So we are taking folks from underserved communities who have not had traditional on-roads to success and giving them 16 weeks of training so that they can build their resume and find great opportunities for work. We are very much focused on technology. And at IC Stars, my role as the workforce development manager is to connect our talent to employment. So that is a very interesting task because our folks are coming with limited experience compared to like their college graduate peers. But what we're seeing is that there's been a lot of changes around job requirements and what's important and what can we scratch off the job requirement. And that's a big part of my role is advocacy and helping employers to understand that just because someone doesn't have maybe their 4-year degree in tech doesn't mean that they can't be successful. And a lot of these people are coming from places where they've had to be resilient. They've had to overcome a lot of challenges, which then we know is very helpful in the tech space as well, because you're constantly building solutions and solving problems. The other thing that we're seeing a lot, which I think is very obvious, is that virtual work is becoming more and more common. And that has really opened the doors for our talent because sometimes a lot of these jobs are not in Chicago. They're like in the suburbs far away where people, maybe can't afford right away transportation or whatever it is. So having the virtual workspace open up has been really valuable for us. We've placed people, outside of Chicago, and it's just opened the doors for more great jobs. So IC Stars does a lot of cool things, but in relation to this conversation, I think I would say positive changes are on the rise for employment right now, just due to the nature of what's going on in our country.
Great. All right, thank you very much. So I got a note that I forgot to share the results of the poll. So let's see if we can't share those now. Great, looks like we've got some pretty good participation there, and I'm going to share them. So we asked our attendees, how would you describe your organization's hiring status? And it looks like we've got a couple people that are hiring and finding mix of qualified and unqualified applicants. We're hiring and cannot find applicants. And we do have a couple of people that are not hiring, and only one person who is hiring and finding qualified applicants. So we will hopefully be able to provide some additional good information for our other attendees today. So thank you, Laura, for that note. All right, moving on. So continuing to talk about finding new employees. We have so many open roles right now. Let's see, and many organizations and companies, speaking to the two people or a couple of people from our poll just then, aren't finding the right ones. So how would you advise organizational leaders to look into the marketplace to fill their open positions? Aurelia, I'm going to let you go first here.
Yeah, excellent question. I think, well, coming from the space of non-traditional talent, I think it's important that we look outside the box. I think for us, even, hiring employees on at IC Stars, there are places where we didn't originally expect to look, right? And something as simple as Craigslist is interesting how many applicants we've gotten from a candidate perspective, from folks who want to join the program. And that's non-traditional. Like Craigslist is somewhere I think you look to find maybe a couch, but not necessarily a new potential candidates for employment. So I think looking outside the box, and this is the message definitely that we're telling employers all the time, is it's less work on you too. If you're gonna, as we all know, HR is going through hundreds and hundreds of applicants sometimes, but maybe let's start in unusual places and see what we find there. And I think too, as broad and simple as this sounds, being open-minded. There's so many stories where people who don't fit the criteria of the job description just absolutely kill the job. They come in and they're ready to work and they're eager. They're maybe not as, set in their ways. That's what we're seeing sometimes is folks who've worked at maybe the same company for a long time. They do things a certain way and they want to come in and do things that way. But when you've got maybe fresher, not necessarily younger, but just people that are eager, right? People who are I want a career change. Some of the folks coming through our program, they're not 21, they're 42 or whatever, and we don't have an age cap, and they're just eager to try something new. So I think being open-minded to folks that maybe don't meet every specific criteria. I've talked to HR leaders that are very strict, and I'm come on, they've got all these other things, and there's just really one or two items that they're not checking off. And sometimes getting everyone on board can be tough. Sometimes we'll have the technology manager on board, we'll have the CIO on board, but then the HR person is kind of that block. So really using for me, the method of getting the whole team on board and really finding who are the stakeholders, who are the three people that we need to get to say yes, has worked for me. Having multiple conversations. So I'm not just going to one person, I'm going to all of them. So that's been what's worked for me. And I can say more, but I'll pass it to Heather.
Yeah, that's great. Heather, go ahead.
Yeah, now, Arlie, I would really support what you're saying. So more of our searches are at the executive level, but we are increasingly being asked by clients where we've done top level searches to kind of help search at mid-level manager level, not so much at the entry level. But one of the first things we are finding important to do these days is any job description has 5 to 10 lists of qualifications and all the bullets, and as you said, everything they want. We're asking the clients, what are the top 3 most important ones? Is a bachelor's degree really required for this work? And at some organizational positions, it is, and master's is, just because they're supervising other degree people. And in other cases, it's not. And that's been probably one of the most notable changes we've seen at both mid-level and upper level job descriptions is questioning that. Do we really need, if someone has 15 years of experience or 8 years of experience, do they really need to have a degree? And for, again, some positions it is and it isn't. So really looking at those. There's also a great video going around LinkedIn about I think that the title is, why can't we hire anyone? And it shows this gymnast or exercise, kind of in a gym, going on a balance beam, doing tumbling, running through hoops, swinging from things, and thinking about the process. What do you put candidates through to hire? We oftentimes, the most we counted with a client, they wanted 38 people to meet the finalist candidate. And this was a mid-level position. And that was in groups. So it wasn't all one-on-one, but there were some one-on-ones, one-on-twos. And the process, they tried to do it within 3 days, which was okay, a little bit hard to put together. But the candidates were like, can't they make a decision? Don't they know, do I have to meet 38 people? So really thinking about your hiring process and what is most vital in that. What are the top 2 or 3 things? Don't cut corners, don't rush through it, but be thorough in the 2 or 3 areas that are most important, and perhaps rethink the process of involving, 10 stakeholders, even at that, in terms of timing. One other element that I would say is our general quote this week is that for every single qualified candidate, there are 20 open jobs at the, at the mid-level and upper levels. So at that level, you have to move quickly as a hiring entity. You can't wait to get 6 people and whittle it down and whittle it down. They're just, you'll lose people and you won't make a hire because it'll just take too long. And there's some misconceptions about all the people that are available on the market and all the open jobs, but the reality is there's a tremendous mismatch. And if you sit around trying to think through it, for 3 months before you act, likely anyone you liked up front will be long employed by somewhere else.
That's great. And Heather, I think I'm going to give you an opportunity here kind of with our next question to expand on that a little bit more about the pre-hiring process, because it seems like much of the most important work is done on that front end. Knowing what skill sets are actually needed, and then writing a great job description that actually meets the work that you've done inside the office. Knowing where to place them, Eddy, you talked about Craigslist, right? And thinking about where you can strategically place your ads or your hiring notices, where you're likely to find those qualified candidates. So what advice would you give to nonprofit leaders that are just starting their hiring process? They're in other words, they're developing their pre-hiring process. What do you think that should look like to give them the best opportunity for success? Heather, why don't you just pick up maybe where you left off there?
Yep. So going back to what Aurelie said, pick those 3 people that have to make the final decision and start with them. Make sure you're clear on what you need. Make sure look at the job description, prioritize your top, third of job requirements. I think as we are seeing many jobs these days are remote and virtual, what does that mean? So if I can share an example, and we do national work as well as Chicago work, we're based in Chicagoland, but we had a client say, no, this has to be remote. I don't want a list of geography. They wanted the person to work in the Southeast, anywhere from Florida to Texas, but they wanted to say remote. So we have people right now from 38 states. And we're having to tell everyone from not those 5 states that they're looking at, well, remote really means the Southeast, but you work from home. It's not remote. You can work from Fargo, North Dakota or New Mexico. And so it's creating a lot of frustration on the candidates. Why didn't you say that up front? It's creating a lot of extra work for my team to have to go through all those people because there's some great people and they're just physically, and the hiring entity won't relocate them. So be very clear when you say remote position, virtual work, hybrid work environment. And the reality is we're finding most employers don't have a definition of what their work environment will end up being within 60 days, and plans are made and pushed and changed. Just be honest and descriptive. As of September 2021, we are working this way and expect to be working that way within the next 6 months. Give your best guess. They're not going to hold you to it if conditions and the world continues to change as it is, but just be really clear on virtual and remote positions of exactly what that means. Lastly, I think we often look for people where we know we have our own networks, whether that's standard traditional job boards, whether that's our LinkedIn network, whether that's candidates we've interviewed or advertised to in the past. Stretch that thinking. Use what Aurelie said. Post in some unusual places. You never know who you're going to find and who may come into the process. And don't presume. I would say 3 years ago, you could presume to post a job and get a good pool of 50 to 100 applicants. I think today there are so many opportunities. People are being more selective where they're applying. So you're going to have to work a little harder to get the right people into the pool that you want to interview. So be broad, use your network. If your employees don't have network where they can share, ask them to do that. Ask them to if hopefully good reviews, but write reviews about you as an employer on Glassdoor. We're finding a lot of people, Glassdoor. Yeah, writing a lot of reviews on there. Your own company's social media sites. We're seeing a lot more traction from our clients' work and some in our work on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. LinkedIn a little bit more we use on the professional site, but a lot of it's still done on social media sites. And I know that there's a lot of sites that I'm not even up on in terms of Snapchat and Twitter, and I can't even comment how those are for hiring in positions. But go to your standard and then do equal amounts in areas that are not standard to create visibility for your organization.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Aurelie?
Yeah, and just for a little bit of context, I'm strictly entry level, and that it's interesting, like the contrast, because even though we're placing entry level folks, all of my communications are with upper level CIOs. Did you guys lose me or can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're good. Yep.
Okay, it's telling me my connection's unstable, so apologies. But I just wanted to reiterate the clear expectations is so important, because I think sometimes employers forget that not only are you choosing your next employee, but that employee has to choose you as well. And we've seen so many of our talent get frustrated with the process, and they'll reach out to me and they'll say, I don't know if I want to work for this company because they haven't emailed me back in a week. They changed my interview time twice. Just their communication is not super professional. And that can be really tough for me, because I'm here advocating for them to get these roles. But if the company's not doing their part, we could be the ones to say no to you, right? So like making sure that everything throughout the process is professional, is clear. And then also sometimes like just being upfront with your timeline from the very beginning is super important, because what happens is, as an employee, as a candidate, you're expecting a reasonable time frame, right? Like, okay, I'm going to apply for this job and maybe within 30 days, well, I'll know yes or no. And we've had companies where they'll make an offer and the start date will be like 2.5 months later. And I'm like, that's just not realistic for people who are looking for income right now, right? Like, so there are a lot of factors that I think maybe because hiring is not your first priority, like you're not putting as much energy and emphasis into it. And if you're a smaller nonprofit, that makes sense, right? Like you've got all these fires you're putting out, so you're not necessarily thinking about this candidate. But that really does make a difference in whether or not you're going to find the right person that's going to be happy, that's going to be excited to come on and do a good job. And then also like find ways as an employer to set yourself apart. What makes you unique? And I love what you said about social media, but like things that are going to set you apart from another employer, where most of us, when we're interviewing, we're not just interviewing with one company, right? Like we're probably interviewing with 3 or 4. What makes you stand out? What makes me want to work for your company? And I think it's really important that we remember that this is a two-way street. No one is just sitting around, hoping that you hire them. They want also to want to work there. They want to be happy, and setting yourself apart in the smallest of ways can make such a big difference in whether or not someone says yes to your offer. Yeah.
Great.
Early,
Go ahead,
I
Heather. Yeah.
pick up on that a little bit. So we use a term often with our hiring partners at whatever level the hiring manager is to talk about employer brand. And it's something not widely talked about or focused on in the nonprofit and the public sector. So in public sector jobs, there is a air of kind of an air that's put on, like everybody wants a government job, and not true. People want to work in different companies and different sectors for all different reasons. In nonprofits, I think it's a resources thing. You just don't always have the time to do that. But your employer brand makes all the difference in the world. So one of our client partners, I was doing some research, and there was on some website somewhere, there was a description of, well, I applied for a job there 2 years ago, and it took 4 months, and then they never, I had 3 interviews and nobody ever called me back, and someone articulated their whole story. And one of the top candidates we were talking to found that and asked me about that and said, look, is this going to be the process? What's the timeline? And I assured them it wasn't. And unfortunately, it turned out to be that way, largely because the HR team was so busy with their hiring. Once the people we were working with identified their top 2 people, the HR team couldn't work them into the process. So that employer brand was out there, searchable online. I mean, and keep in mind, in today's day and age, everything can be found online. And so you have to make sure your employer brand represents what you want and is attractive to potential employees at any level. Much as Areli said, they want to work for you as much as you need them to work for them. It's viewed, I think, by the labor force, and I'll use the labor force to say workers at any level. It's viewed much more these days as a joint partnership. Like, you would be lucky to have me as much as you'd be lucky to work for us as an organization. And I do think some hiring managers and executive leaders don't always take the degree of the change of that aspect of hiring into consideration. So the labor market changes just like economic cycles change and all of that over time. And we are in definitely a candidate market. Candidates can select where they want to work. They're holding the cards, they're negotiating the timelines, they're negotiating compensation. We see compensation increase during hiring markets like this, and it's definitely what's happening, and we see it every day. So as an employer, you can't just sit there and say they're going to be lucky to work, they're going to be lucky to have a job, they're going to be lucky to work for us. You have to work as hard to entice them as they're working to show you their skills. So what your employer brand is makes a big difference.
Yeah, that's great. And we're going to touch a little more deeply on a couple of those things in just a minute, compensation in particular. So Heather, one question, and kind of also in the theme of what you were just talking about here. So as Areli mentioned, we're, executive directors, presidents, hiring managers, plates are completely full these days. Even when you have an open job that you do get, many good applicants for, you've got all your other regular day-to-day work. And, it's kind of separating the urgent from the important, right? And making time, and hiring is one of those things that tends to be both urgent and important. And so it automatically has to go to the top of the stack. So you both work in kind of outsourced, job search and placement roles, but in other sides, kind of opposite sides. So Heather, as an executive search partner, tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing in applicants, and any additional trends that you're seeing emerge on their side.
So more than ever, the request for and desire for flexibility from all levels of the career cycle. So typically it was a generational change we were seeing. Earlier career or earlier life stage workers wanted more flexibility, work-life balance. Later career professionals had a different sense of commitment to work and what place work had in their life. Right now, and the pandemic has, as I said up front in my remarks, really recalibrated priorities all over the place. And we have some very unusual requests. I can think of a funny story. A CEO almost got down to the finalists, then brings up, oh, by the way, in the past year, my board has let me work 30 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week. And I'd like to do that in this new CEO job. And that just solved things right there with the assumption of a new person coming in. obviously in their old employer, perhaps they proved themselves and their worth to be able to get the job done in 30 hours, but a generally held conception of a CEO or leader is that's a 50, 60 hour a week job. And this individual was saying, I want to be clear up front, I'm only going to work 30 hours, but I want the compensation and the title and the scope of responsibility at 40 hours. That was a fascinating discussion, one of the bigger ones that's thrown me in the past 6 months. Flexibility of workplace and time. Is 8 to 5 really the work hours that we do? Many of our clients are 24/7. They're direct care providers of human services or healthcare services. We do a lot of healthcare to other people. I would imagine Aurelie in the technology field too. There's certainly some things that can be done during the business day, but then there's a lot of IT type of work that needs to get done 24/7 as well. So the employer being flexible and recognizing that if work needs are shifted throughout the 24-hour clock, even at executive levels, how do you adjust to that? The last thing I would say in terms of trends of what we're seeing in applicants is the sense that this is a partnership. I'm not beholden to you as the employer. We're partnering together to get this job done, to further this mission along, to do this project. So we both have to contribute equally to that. And so it's necessitating a different type of leadership and people with different sets of leadership skills. And how does a leader be present in this way, electronically and virtually, and still have the same relationship as maybe leaders that have been in the workforce for more than 20 years expected, in the office, at the water cooler, in the break room, walking down the hall, and that's how they know how to build relationships. We see some clients that just say to us every day, we cannot wait to get back in the office and have people punch their time clocks and sit at their desks again. And, I don't always want to be the one to say, it's not going to happen that way anymore. So how are you thinking differently about that? Because not only has the world changed, but the labor force has driven that change. And many large private sector companies are not even going back to the office. So what does that mean? And how do we, if we're in a small or a medium-sized nonprofit or governmental municipality, public agency, how do we get our work done and adapt our processes? So last little step there, we talked with this organization, they need to hire an HR person. Everything they do in HR is on paper. They don't have an online application. There's no electronic files. So they're saying to me, they need and I'm like, what did you do during the pandemic? I didn't dig too deep, but so they need a new leader that will help bring them more current. And I said, okay, but this isn't just, you can't pin that all on a leader. This is a huge culture. They still handled paper resumes. They still handled paper manila file folders. He took a picture and showed it to me. And so that's a clear example of, kind of cave person way of doing HR, but I can only imagine what that's done to their hiring, because in pandemic, you couldn't have, they were actually accepting resumes by mail over the past year. Like you had to mail in your resume. Who does that anymore? But I know, look at the faces of my co-panelists here. So, the degree of evolution that some organizations need to undergo, there's this adaptation to the new way of how we're going to be, but then there's also many historically embedded processes, systems, and mindsets that should have been changed pre-pandemic, now have to be changed, and they need leadership to help guide them through that. So there's a little bit all over, Brad. Sorry, I went.
No. That's great. That's great. It's super important information. And, what I'm just sitting here thinking is like, there's that last example about the company still working on paper, notwithstanding, there's so much change so fast that, Heather, to what you said at the beginning, if we came back a year from now and revisited this same conversation, I don't know how much of it is going to be the same. So yeah, fascinating information. So I'm sure our attendees are getting good value out of these observations. So, all right, Aurelie, one specifically for you. So as workforce development manager, what are you seeing companies that you work with in terms of trying to find placements for them? What are you seeing the companies do to respond to the current job market?
Oh, great question. I think it goes back to, okay, so specifically for entry level, I would say something that we're seeing a lot is that companies need to shift to onboarding and training being a priority, right? Like when you're looking at entry-level talent, especially in a virtual environment, you cannot expect someone to come in and just know what to do. And especially when they're virtual and they can't just go over to the next cubicle and ask a question. So we're working specifically with employers to say, do you have training and development? Do you have onboarding set up? Because if you don't, you might not be the right fit for specifically for entry-level talent. Folks coming out of IC Stars typically have this 4-month experience that's super extensive. Like, I mean, they're with us from Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. So 12-hour days. But that is very different than going into a corporate environment where they're now a junior developer and they have to know all these softwares and processes. And if there's no one there to train them, if there's no one there to mentor them, the chances of them being successful is much lower. So I think a lot of companies are coming around to this idea of being more intentional with onboarding. If you're not going to be intentional, I promise the person is not going to last. And it's also not going to be a good first experience for them. It could totally change like the trajectory of what they want to do if they think this is how it is everywhere. So we're very specific now to have these conversations with employers about onboarding and training. What does that look like? Especially when you're dealing with underserved populations, they're already fragile. So do they have someone that's going to mentor them and invest in them? And what's really awesome is we are seeing that companies want that. They want to bring in new talent that they can train from within, that are going to be loyal, that are going to stay with their company. So it's kind of like a win-win, but they do recognize that it's a lot of work. So they'll tell us just straight out, like, no, we don't have that in place, but let's work together to get that in place so that we can work with you, and pull from your talent pipeline, because that's what we want. We want loyal people. So I would say onboarding and training is huge, and not just for entry level, like for everyone. Like you need someone to lean on. You need someone to be there to answer your questions. And in this virtual space, that's increasingly more difficult because our alumni will reach out to me and say, I just don't know who to ask. I don't know what to do. And I'm here and I want to work, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. And so I think onboarding is imperative, and that companies need to really invest in that and take time building that out so that when new employees come in, there's a process for the first at least 4 weeks and how they can start out successful. So
yeah. That's great. I will actually comment here on this one as well. At Big Buzz Idea Group, we actually had 2 new employees start on Tuesday of this week. So we've recently undergone a whole hiring. Yes, thank you, Deja, Nancy. We're super excited to have you. Welcome to the team, and a busy first week. But this is kind of commenting on a couple different pieces of what you've both talked about, thinking about what remote work and hybrid work was going to look like for our office, because our office has had, before the pandemic, we had people in office full-time. We've had people that are full-time hybrid, couple days in the office, couple days working remotely. And so what is life going to look like for these new employees? What are the expectations going to be? And then where COVID is in the city of Chicago, where our office is, given the current situations, we know we're going to be doing that training and onboarding remotely. We're a pretty small team, but we work very closely on much of our client work. And so getting people up to speed on the clients, on our culture, on our processes, Eddy, as you talked about here, is really something that we had to think about and are continuing to work on so that we can get better at it when we hire again in the future. And one thing that I'll just mention that we have decided we want to start doing a lot of is recording a lot of our trainings and, just reviewing processes or getting on, showing somebody how, we're running through the phone system, as kind of an odd example, but you can kind of edit that video later, but then as new people come in, you can say, this is like the video library of resources that we have. We're still going to have a meeting to go through the way it works. But if you ever need, and I'm available for questions, but if you ever need the resource again, it's here in our library. It's here in our knowledge base of how we operate as a company, and just being able to put those items in place for this new virtual environment that everybody's still getting used to is, one of the things that we're doing. So I think both of your points are really good there.
I just want to, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Aurelia.
I was going to say, I'd love to piggyback off that because we just had to, yesterday, we had to redo our handbook for our program participants because our last cohort, they're very clever and they're bringing up things like, that's not in the handbook, that's not in the handbook. And the reason why was because it was not set up for a virtual space. It was not explicit. It was set up for in the office. And so yesterday, my team and I went through and basically redid the entire handbook so that it was reflecting what this means in a virtual space. And so it's really important. It's not the same. We're having to recalibrate everything. And I think that's a great point that you brought up because things don't look the same in a virtual environment. So I think something as easy as a handbook is so important that we're upgrading that to reflect what this means virtually. Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
That's a great point.
And this just builds on what you've just both said is something that we've seen on our team at KEES, but as well with our clients is the handbook. You used to come in on day one and meet with HR, fill out your paperwork and sit down and you were given the handbook and then someone took you out to lunch and, showed you a couple things. Here, it's happening virtually, may not even be in person. If it's remote, they could be in a different state. And people learn differently. So some people are going to read a handbook. Some people are going to go Google YouTube videos on their own, Brad, on how to use your phone system. And then there's the technical part of using the phone system. And then there's the big buzz way of using the phone system. And then other people are just not going to learn like that, and as people change in life cycles, they learn differently. They need a verbalization of what to do. And so they might need, okay, here's the handbook, here's the video, here's this, spend a little bit of time with that, and then I'll walk you through it. And any one of those three may be how it's going to click. One of the things we did at KEES, we're very much like Big Buzz, a smaller team. We've been virtual since 2013. So the pandemic was nothing new to us. We couldn't figure out why all of you and the rest of the world didn't know how to work virtually. But one of the things we did actually during the pandemic was exactly what you said, Arlie. We created what we called an onboarding packet. And it wasn't the handbook and it wasn't that, but it was how do we work? How does our team work? And where do you find stuff? And what does your network drive look like? And where do you find help on the phone system and doing this and doing that and doing time and expenses and just for you as an employee. And then one of the most valuable pieces, which we've gotten feedback on, is we defined what we call communication standards. How do we communicate? So email, we use Microsoft Teams, texting within Teams, and what levels of communication at what priority occur when, because what we found was everybody comes at it differently and has their own preference. And we're all going crazy trying to figure out, oh, Brad, you read emails until 5 and then you text after 5. Or Arlie, you never do email, you only do messaging on social media or this or that. So we set some standards for how we work. And with new workers coming in, particularly, I would say early stage workers or entry level workers, the whole way they don't sit and read email all day, they're out doing things. I mean, you might only get a response from them from texting. So define, this is for all of us to kind of think about, define how your team or how the team the person's going to work on communicates and what are those communication standards. So, one of ours is anything HR related, that's verbal, doesn't matter, nothing in writing, no emails, you don't give negative feedback, you don't do it that way. But if it's a calendar update, don't call anyone and bother them, just send it electronically. Different things that you might think are intuitive to those that are on your team or on the team. And Arlie, as you're helping clients with new onboarding, don't assume that it's intuitive to the person you're bringing on. One, because they don't know your culture, but two, they might come from a very different background. So defining that and being intentional, making sure that first 3 to 5 days, they're not really accountable for the output and the work that they've been hired to do. They're accountable to learn, and you're accountable to teach them how you do the work.
That's great. Yeah, we even take that communication standards training down to who goes on the to line, who goes on the CC line, who goes on the BCC line for emails, because different companies do it different. Yeah, because different companies do it different ways. So this is a really great ideas and information. So I think we're going to take just a quick step back to talk a little bit about interviewing, because I think that's a really important part of the finding and keeping the right person for your jobs. So Aurelie, could you mention like one to two of the most important aspects of interviewing as leaders are thinking about bringing on long-term employees? And we recognize too, as part of this, that not all employment engagements we're really thinking are going to be for 3, 5+ years, right? There are some roles where we know employees are going to stay a year, 18 months, 2 years. They're going to build a base skill set and then move on, especially in companies, maybe smaller organizations where there's not a lot of upward, room for growth in that organization. So as we're thinking about hiring longer term employees, what are our 1 to 2 top tips that interviewers should be thinking about?
Yeah, I would say, again, some of these things just sound so basic, but I think getting back to basics sometimes is what we need to do. And intentionality around types of questions is so important, because I will often hear employers say, we didn't learn XYZ about the candidate that you sent us. And my question is, well, did you ask? Like, how could you possibly expect someone to give you this information if you didn't ask? And I think something as simple as like the questions that you are asking, is that truly the information that you want to know? Or are you asking these cookie cutter, like, what are your 3 strengths and weaknesses? Like, which is just so 1975, like that's not really giving you what you need. So asking, I think, scenario-based questions, finding out stories. I think stories are so important in an interview. And if you don't give someone that opportunity, oftentimes in an interview, you're nervous and you're like, am I talking too much? You might have so much that you want to share, but if the door is not opened for them to share that, they're not going to share that. And so it's mind-boggling to me sometimes. They'll say like, oh, we didn't learn this or this or this. And I'm like, can you share the questions that you asked? And there won't be anything from those questions where they could possibly, unless they just magically on their own decided to share, that they would get that information. So I think being very intentional about your questions and being very specific, and also don't be afraid to ask follow-up questions. Sometimes I feel like interviews are so rushed, or even for the candidate, they feel, like I said, am I saying too much? But that's the time that you have to get the information from the person. So like interview, like, let's just forget about the world right now and let's just like really hone in on like this person and what their skill set is so important. So to me, that's number one, like questions being very detailed, very specific. Am I going to get what I need out of the answers from these questions? And then the other thing goes back to what Heather and I talked about earlier around just communication and professionalism and transparency. Like, you have to be honest about what you want. You have to be clear. You have to be timely. Like, someone having an interview with you and then not hearing from you for 2 weeks is just not acceptable. So I think between having the right questions and being intentional about your process, everything goes back to process, right? I say this all the time. If we don't have a process or a procedure or policy, no one's going to know. So being very, very intentional about your process. This is our timeline. This is what our candidate pool looks like. We're interviewing 5 people. It seems to me like it shouldn't be such a big tip to tell a company like, hey, be transparent and have open communication and professionalism. But the amount of times I see that missing is so frequent that it's unreal. Like, you guys have to be better at this. You're not going to find good talent. So those 2 things are what stand out to me.
That's great. Heather, did you want to give a tip or 2 on interviewing?
Yeah, let the candidate talk. The biggest piece of feedback we give to our clients is, well, you talked for 30 minutes, they talked for 20. How much did you learn? And there's a lot of reasons that happens. I think, Arlie, as you said, candidates come in, or hiring managers come in, they're rushed. They try to rush through it. We get a lot of feedback from candidates when we're not in the room, and sometimes we are and sometimes we aren't. They feel like the person hasn't even read their resume, doesn't know a thing about them, pulls it out of a folder and says, oh, Arlie, tell me about yourself. Doesn't even know the name of the person that they're walking into. And I think we see this more and more at mid-level and entry-level roles. We hear that feedback, less so in executive level roles, but let the person talk, because that's why they're there. You're there to learn about them, presume they've done some research on you. And however, most hiring managers, if you actually timed it, do spend more time talking about themselves and their organization than they find out talking to the person. The second tip I would add to what Arlie said is be intentional about your questions. Have 3 questions about the job and 3 questions about the person. Just presume you're only going to get through 6, and don't come in with your HR list of 40 template questions and not think about it ahead of time, because what HR asked a year ago doesn't even apply right now, right? So one of the key questions we're encouraging today is, how do you learn information? Because some people read it, just we said about this, some people read it, some people watch it on YouTube or video, some people need it told to them. And that how you learn information was very is it directed one way in past ways, and we're in a much different environment right now. So 3 questions about the position that you need to match their skills to, and 3 questions about the person. And if you get nothing else, let them answer 6 questions to dig at what you really want, because you can't say, oh, I don't know if they can do this or that if you don't ask.
Yeah, that's a great, 3 to the position and 3 to the person. That's a great tip. All right, so transitioning, kind of bridging our conversation more a little to specifically keeping our employees here, and I am keeping an eye on the clock. We've got about 10 more minutes left for our discussion and a couple items I want to get through. So, but compensation, we definitely can't let go, because it is key to both finding and keeping employees. So because there's so many jobs available right now, we've seen a lot of moves in terms of compensation, both in terms of cash, in terms of benefits, working remotely, even into the future, companies not, deciding that they are just going to cancel their on-location work. So Heather, talk to us just for a minute about what are you seeing in terms of compensation, and what should new leaders be thinking about in terms of what they need to offer?
Benchmark your compensation before you put the job out there, or even as you're doing it. Keep in mind, a lot of benchmarking data and information is at least 2.5 to 3 years old at this point, because not a lot of benchmarking and compensation reporting was done in 2020. So you're looking at 2019 data, which is off 2019 reports, which is often based on 2018 data. In today's market, candidates are going to consider a job offer this way or that way for a couple $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 difference in an offer. That's important on the new hire. On the retention side, also keep in mind the parity, because if you've had someone at your organization for 15 years and it's a similar level job, and let's say they're earning 45,000, 50,000, but now the new competition out there for a position today is pushing that to 60 to 70,000. So you've got to do that to get the people you want. How do you keep the people that have been there for a long time and have only inched up so far? How do you create equity and parity in compensation? And there's a cost to that, right? So if you offer something, a candidate negotiates it up by 3 to 5 to 10,000, keep in mind, in nonprofits, compensation is public data that eventually comes out. Hopefully some rules of process are there and people aren't saying, hey, I got hired for this amount. But those long-term employees, once they begin to hear about, and we've seen this happen in a lot of cases, once they begin to hear about, oh, so-and-so was brand new, I've been here 8 years, they're earning 4,000 more than me or 15,000 more than me, whatever the number is, you're likely to reduce that person. So you have to keep up with compensation. That's a huge challenge and a huge cost. And I'm not saying it isn't. When the minimum wage issues come up and bubble up, particularly if you border on the city of Chicago and you're a close suburb there, people can oftentimes go down the street and get $2 an hour more, and an hourly rate jobs, that's important over time. So you really have to, amongst your many, many things as a hiring manager and as an executive leader of an organization, you have to stay on top of where market rate compensation is. It can't just be, this is what we offer. And, they would be lucky to have a job. That there's still a lot of that mindset out there. And that's not the case of what we're seeing in candidates today.
That's great. Aurelie?
Yes, I co-sign everything that Heather said, but definitely my biggest gripe with this is don't be cheap. Like, it's really frustrating, especially with entry-level talent. We're talking about folks who are, they're not living with their parents and being supported coming out of, maybe college level. They are folks who have their own families. They are people who are looking for a career change, who are looking for longevity, who are going to be committed employees. So sometimes these conversations that I have with employers, I have to stop myself from laughing, because I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way that that's, what you're offering. And then they need to recognize that they're not competitive at all. You're not going to find good employees if the pay that you're offering is significantly lower than 5 other companies that I'm talking to. So I think for me, just being very candid with employers and sharing what those other offerings are, like, hey, you're $4 or $5 lower than the rest of these companies. My talent is not going to take these roles, right? And I think going back to mission is so important too, because some of these employers are telling us like, hey, we have diversity goals. We really want to, to hire people from different backgrounds. It's like, well, do you really? Because you need to really think about what your mission is, because if that is a goal of yours, everything has to be aligned. You cannot then lower the salaries for those people coming in, or lower the salaries for entry level. So what is your mission really? And are you really attached to that? Staying competitive is important, but then also with compensation, I think, especially for entry level talent, there's more to the package, right? Like, yes, of course, salary is important and hourly pay is important, but what does the culture look like? Is this somewhere that I'm going to be happy? I've seen our talent pick not too much lower, but a little bit lower of a salary because of their experience in the interviewing process. And they, I love the culture there. I really want to work with those people. And I think that's important too. Like, what does their PTO look like? Can you negotiate 3 more days? If you're not going to give me $1 or more in my hourly pay, can you give me 3 more days of PTO? So I think just having that flexibility is really important, and just, stop with the nonsense. Like this, it's Chicago, like Heather was saying, like you have to, the cost of living is high here, right? So being open to that and not being so strict. When employers tell me like, this is the pay and that's it, I'm like, that's not even realistic. Like we're living in a world where everyone's going to want to negotiate on some level, right? So like just being flexible, I think, is really important.
Great, thank you.
For the
All
first
right,
time, Brad,
yeah,
if I could just, for the first time in a long time, we have turned down partnerships with prospective clients because they are not realistic about compensation. They think they can get someone for 62,000. We know market rate is 92,000. So we said no to the work. And a Big Buzz knows, as a professional service firm, you try to make everything work, and because you're trying to operate your firm as well. But once we see it's too far out of realism, we know it's more, they're not going to find it on their own. Let them try and potentially then come back to us once their eyes are opened on them.
Yeah, that's great. We do have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, and one is germane to this topic. Heather, can you speak to where can smaller nonprofits find information that they should know about those market rates as they're doing this pre-hiring work?
So a lot of it is there's salary surveys based on what so SHRM if you're hiring an HR person, AFP if you're hiring a development person, ASAE if you're hiring association or structural executives. There are salary surveys, they are a bit dated now. So the thought is by 2022 we'll have something more current. Some of it's just legwork, looking online, looking at what positions are posted. Illinois does not require a salary range be posted, but other states do. So in 3 other states we work in for sure, Washington State, California, they actually require the employer in nonprofits, well, in all positions really, to post compensation ranges. So some of it's just looking. Some of it is surveying, and a 2 or a 3% cost of living increase doesn't necessarily cut it anymore in a hiring, in a tight job market. You can offset some of that perhaps with a hiring bonus versus, which keeps your annual compensation lower. But you need to do that. GuideStar, ProPublica, Cause IQ gives you a lot of insight and information. Based on the position level, it's a little harder at the middle and the lower levels of compensation than it is at the upper levels. But you definitely need to do some homework on it, and then listen to your market, right? If you ask people when they apply, what do you expect for this role? You're going to get some crazy outliers. We got one the other day, he wanted 820,000, and that was coming down from his 7-figure salary in private sector. I'm like, yeah, so do I. But, ask people, what do you want for this range? And that gives you a sense of, you got 30 applicants. How do you calibrate what is the average people are asking?
That's great. All right, so we're going to stick with the audience Q&A here, because I think there's some other ones that are really good, and I want to make sure that we have time for that. We've got about 5 minutes left for the program. Aurelie, do you have recommendations for how to make new hires feel integrated into an existing team when they are remote and getting to know people? It's not as easy as when the whole team was in the office.
Yes. I think taking time for team building activities, even if they're very small, right? I think especially in tech, a lot of companies do like daily stand-ups, and it's very like business, right? Like we're jumping in right away. What's everyone doing? But why not take 10 minutes to do a fun icebreaker and help people to get to know each other? We do that at IC Stars all the time because we're very intentional about community, because we are a small team too. There's like 16, 17 of us. And it's really nice like to start a meeting out with like a cool, even if it's a very fast, because obviously we need to be productive, but a 10-minute where everyone gives one word that's like something just so crazy, like just a fun icebreaker that gets everybody laughing. You learn a little bit about people, you see someone's personality. Personality comes out a lot when you're doing an icebreaker. It does not come out when you're talking about what solution you're building for your tech team. Like it, you're just, so I think being intentional about team building is really important. And then also, at least at IC Stars, we're really big on celebrations. So like celebrating each other, but also celebrating things that everyone can sort of relate to. So like holidays, making sure that there is time aside to, around Thanksgiving, like everyone talks about what they're thankful for, like just building in opportunities to do non-work things, of course, in a way that's not pulling away from work, I think is really important. But when you're coming into a new company, everyone should know that, hey, there's a new employee on the team, like make them feel welcome. We always get an email that doesn't include that person. Like our whole staff will get an email that says, can you please, send some love to the new employee? So I'll send an email and send like a cool gift, like welcome to the team. We're so lucky to have you, so just finding little ways to include that person and making sure that everyone on the team does it. I think a little bit goes a really long way.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. All right, Heather, I want to toss this one to you. In our virtual world now, do you have recommendations or tips on how to effectively identify and meet the learning preferences for employees? In the virtual world, it seems challenging to balance the Zooming and the virtual training, but then having the new person implement that knowledge that they've learned.
Yeah, ask them. Yeah. How do you best learn? That's actually one of our interview questions on our team, is how do you best learn and digest information? And then they're going to give you an answer. And don't presume that's the only way they learn, because once they're actually in your environment, they're going to see different ways. So we try on the KEES team, we try to train on things multiple ways. Read the manual, let's have a discussion about it, and then let's have you talk to 3 people about how they interpret that aspect of what we do. So ask the person and meet them where they're at. Maybe they do want to watch a video, maybe they do want to read an article, but then wrap the other ways around them. And that's a great way to achieve what Arlie suggested too, is assign people, and this takes time and intentionality, but assign people. Okay, Brad, you're going to spend 20 minutes with new employee A. 10 minutes, get to know them, tell them your life story and your college, whatever, or your family, this, or your weekend plans, and then 10 minutes on the phone system. Arlie, you're going to talk to employee B and do that 3 days later and follow up with them, so that you're wrapping knowledge around them in multiple ways. And there's some basic pieces of knowledge to share. And then there's obviously the project work at hand when they're in the employer situation. So there's two levels, I think, of orientation. Sometimes we just think, oh, well, just teach them what we do. You got to do and be more intentional in this virtual environment around the personal relationship side, because it is being built differently. Then you have to do orientation and learning around the job function itself.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much. All right, so we've got about 5 minutes left in the program before the top of the hour. So we're going to go with closing comments. Aurelie, take just 1 minute, minute and a half, and then Heather, we're going to pass it to you for closing comments on kind of top tips for hiring managers. People are going to get off of this program. They're going to go back to that stack of resumes that they have, or they're going to go back to writing that job description. What's like really the most important takeaway from today's program that you really want those individuals to have?
Yeah, I think what I would say, and I've been saying this the entire time, is keep an open mind. And, I think candidates need to do their part in presenting a great resume. They need to do their part in being professional, right? And I think it's 2021. Like, we don't have time to mess around with with resumes that look crazy, right? And that's what we're always telling our talent. So, like, yeah, find those resumes that have what you're looking for and that have, majority of the qualifications. But if they're missing a few, if they don't meet every single criteria, that's fine. Like, give someone a chance. It's highly likely that someone who's missing a few criteria could be a better employee than someone who has every single box checked off. So I'd say definitely be open-minded. And then for your process, like Heather and I keep saying, make sure your process is clean, make sure you're transparent. People are going to want to work for a company that they feel is respecting them as well. And this is not a one-way street, so make sure that you are presenting yourself in a way that someone would want to come and work for you, right? Like, openness and transparency is so important. And I can't tell you the number of folks that have just told me, like, oh, I don't know if I want to work here now because of the interviewing process, because of what they've experienced. So being open-minded, being professional, thinking outside of the box, I think those are things that we often forget to do and are so, so important. So that is what I will leave you with.
That's great. Awesome. Heather, key takeaways.
Yep. Invest the time up front, be prepared, be clear on what you want. Don't draw out the process. And then once you make the hire, invest in the person. And a benefit of remote work is your colleagues around you can hear what you're talking about if you don't have mics on. So one of my colleagues just sent me an article. It's in Inc. magazine this morning. New Harvard research in the middle of the Great Resignation, which hopefully is a term everyone knows we are in, employers are rejecting millions of qualified workers. None of us can afford to have our positions open very long. So I go find that article, Brad, I'll send it to you and maybe you can send it out with the follow-up of this. But it's basically saying you got bad job descriptions because you're asking for things you don't really need. And then the whole piece of artificial intelligence and online systems that just automatically kick people out. So it's an area we didn't even talk about, and how you might have an online application system, but take the time, invest the time. Your jobs will all be much easier as managers and hiring managers and executive leaders if you've got your positions filled, but you're not investing the time that's needed to do it. So it is urgent. What did you say, Brad? Urgent and important.
Urgent and important, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Well, Aurelie, Heather, thank you so very much. Just a couple of closing comments real quick for any of our attendees this morning that might like to go deeper. Big Buzz offers a variety of professional services as part of our company. So this Breakfast Club is a free program we offer to all nonprofit leaders. It's the second Thursday of every month from 8:45 to 10 a.m. We have panel discussions. We have individual speakers on today's hottest topics related to nonprofit management. And good, Laura's putting some links in the chat for people. Our next Breakfast Club coming up in October. If you would like to dig deeper into hiring and what it means for you and your experience as a nonprofit leader, we also offer the Roundtable, which is a small open group discussion about that digs deeper into that month's breakfast club topic. So we'll be digging into hiring, and that's always the Thursday following the breakfast club. So that's once a month. But for those leaders who are looking for a more steady group, a regular program of people that they can confide in, we offer our Power Cell Mastermind group, which does meet once a month. And it's a peer-to-peer discussion group of 3 to 5 people where you can bring the organizational and operational challenges to the table and get help and support for yourself as a leader. And then finally, we offer our Power Up consultations, which are individual one-on-one with somebody from the Big Buzz team, typically with Melissa Legowski, our CEO and founder, who has run the breakfast clubs in the past. And so a lot of people have heard some of her wisdom and knowledge as well. So several different opportunities to continue to engage Big Buzz Idea Group on a monthly basis. And we look forward to seeing people again. Heather, Aurelie, thank you so much for sharing this fantastic information with us this morning. To our attendees, the recordings will be out later today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope everybody has a great day. Thanks.